Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Prep Talk podcast, hosted by myself, Pete Flips, and Nick Spizak. Today, we have a very special guest in Chris Grant at Clear the Shelf. Chris is a seven-figure Amazon seller, a software aficionado, an Amazon community leader, and the self-described chief meme officer of Amazon Twitter. We're very fortunate to have him on today. Welcome, Chris. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. So I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with you, obviously a leader in the Amazon community. Would you mind just kind of going into your backstory a little bit and sharing kind of how you got started with Amazon and what kind of that progression has looked like to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So I first got started actually drop shipping on eBay. And I know that's a dirty word, but back in the day, it was kind of what ecom was. If you weren't selling old cell phones or computer parts or things like that, you were drop shipping products from other sellers. And I was doing that on eBay and doing pretty well. Probably $50,000 a month in gross sales, drop shipping. Margins, there were still margins on drop shipping back then, so it was profitable. Uh, but the problem is that I had no skills. So I was, after work at night, I would go from like 9 until 2 in the morning, and I would be fulfilling all the orders. And that would go till 3 in the morning, and then I'd go to bed and I'd get up and go to work, and it was draining. Um, and I I knew that I wanted to make money on the internet somehow. There was, do I do affiliate marketing? Do I continue this dropship thing and figure out better ways to do it? But I came across a podcast from, uh, oh shoot, it's the SPI podcast with Pat Flynn. He had someone on who talked about Amazon, and I went out, I learned a little bit more about it. I came across guys like Chris Green and a few other communities that are out there, and I learned what Amazon was all about. So I was like, you know what, let's give it a shot. And I went out and I bought a one of those or not the UPS, but one of the USPS plastic mail totes full of magazines. And from a really creepy guy, it was very strange. And I listed all of these magazines on Amazon, merchant fulfilled, threw them in a closet, and I was like, all right, well, if anything sells, I'll figure out a little bit more. Well, sure enough, 1 or 2 days, one of them sells. Another couple of days, another one sells, and I'm about halfway through the crate, and I'm like, okay, this thing is for real. People really like this place. Let's figure out more. So I start diving in even more, and we start doing retail arbitrage first. Thrifting was okay back then. You could actually still email customers, and they would get the emails and they would respond to you. It was very novel, uh, and we were flipping adult diapers. We were flipping. I was trying to buy as much new stuff as I could, uh, and we were also flipping books, and then commercial items. We had some of the Goodwills and what are the Salvation Armies had a bunch of commercial products like paper towel dispensers and things, and so we were flipping everything we could. And then my wife actually had the great idea. She was like, we got to figure out a way to buy these books in bulk. She's like, going and scanning is fine. And we had hired someone to go do some scanning for us of books, and I was paying him like 50 cents a book or something like that we bought. Uh, and I was like, you're right. I was like, let's figure it out. So we went to a book show put on by Half Price Books in the city of Columbus. And she goes up to one of the managers and she's like, hey, she's like, how do I just like buy all these books instead of just going through your stacks? And they're like, oh, yeah, no problem. And they gave us the warehouse manager's name, and we could go buy gaylords of books. We'd load them on the back of a truck, bring them home, and we'd go through them. And that was the moment. It was like, oh man, we've got a real business here. And we had probably 3,500, maybe 4,000 books in stock. But we continued to do the RA grind. Um, and then Amazon said, hey, here are long term storage fees. Your book business is now garbage. And so we started transitioning back into retail arbitrage, and then into OA and things like that. And it's been a wild ride, but it's been a ton of fun.
Okay, nice. So kind of a lot to unpack there. Um, So we kind of niched into books. Did you go into like online arbitrage for any period of time? What did that look like? What did that transition look like from kind of RA?
So that transition was, we had moved on from books because Amazon introduced long-term storage fees, and the books that I had, they were all high priced, but they sell once every 3 months, once every 6 months. And as soon as I got my first $800 monthly storage fee, I was like, okay, well, we got to do something different. And so I went back and I was like, we're going to do retail arbitrage, and I was still working. I was like, so Saturday and Sunday, twice a month, 12, 16 hours a day, I will hit up all of, well, most of the state. Well, the bottom 2/3. I was doing Columbus, Dayton, Cincinnati, and then back up to Columbus. And I was really good at Target. I was really good at a store called Meijer, and I was really good at Walgreens. And so I would just do that loop, and we crushed. It was great. But around the same time, my wife and I were like, you know what? Let's have a kid. It's time to be adults. Um, and so,
That's more.
right. So we started going down that path, and I knew that as soon as we had a kid, I was like, I don't want to miss like the first steps. I don't want to be like always working and being absent. And so I was like, I got to figure something else out. And what actually got me into OA was not traditional OA. Back in the day, you didn't just buy $35 scanners off of Amazon to go and do retail arbitrage. You bought the Cadillac of scanners. It was called a KDC. I think it's the I-200. These things, they're built like tanks. Okay, I still have one somewhere. It'll go through a nuclear bomb and it'll be just fine. And people bought them for about $200 on the regular. I happened to find a seller on eBay selling them refurbished for about $50. So I wrote him and I said, hey, how many do you have and what will you take if I buy all of them? And he was like, oh, well, he's like 35. I'll sell you every one. And I think he had about 150 or 200 of them. So I bought every single one and I started selling them in Facebook groups for Amazon sellers. I said, hey, you want one of these? I said, they're $200 on Amazon. I said, I'm doing them for $175, shipped out the door, warranty. If it's broken, I'll replace it, whatever you need. I sold through all of them within like 2 weeks. I was like, all right, so we gotta find stuff online and sell it. And I knew what retail arbitrage was. So I started following some of the OA sellers, and that's kind of how we transitioned into OA.
Chris, I want to talk about community a little bit, right? So in those
Mm-hmm.
early days, probably not as much or with socials, with having Twitter or X around for those. Walk us through what and not as much information probably at that time. So walk us through, like, what was the community like at that point? How did you go about your own journey in terms of learning how to sell?
There were probably 2 or 3 communities that existed, at least that I knew of. One of them was built by my friend Chris Green. He's kind of, people on Twitter might call me the OG, but Chris Green, he is the O-est of OGs. He's like the first person who ever really did anything about Amazon. He's the first person who came up with an Amazon software that I'm aware of. He was part owner of ScanPower along with Paul Rutherford. And he had a community, so I was in there. People would pretty openly share just about everything. It was a fairly small community. It's still small today, but it seems a lot bigger. It was a small community. People would pretty freely share. I even offered to fly myself out to people's warehouses, to people's operations. I said, I'll clean toilets. I will work for free. I'll do anything just to kind of learn at the feet of someone who was in a place I wanted to be. Unfortunately, nobody took me up on that very strange request. But that's the kind of guy I am. If I want to learn something, if I want to make it work, like, I will literally do whatever it takes so that I can gain the knowledge and the skills to be able to do it for myself. And then there were two other groups. One was started by my friend Nate McAllister, which is still around today. And then there was a third, which I don't recall which one it is anymore. But that's how it worked. I would just read everything I could. I would go through all of the Facebook posts. And then the other 70% of it was literally trial and error. You know, we didn't have Keepa when I first started, so we just said, okay, it's under 100,000 in sales rank. Let's give it a shot. You're buying 2 or 3 and sending them in, and you know, hoping they sell, and then you just kind of figure it out along the way.
Chris, you've been one of the ones that we followed for a long time, and how we've been able to learn along this journey. Now, as you were going through that, you talked about the aspect of experimentation. Walk us through that mindset. Like, what were the types of things you were doing where you didn't have all these extra software, these capabilities that are available today? What did that journey look like, and how did you go through making decisions to say, hey, this is something I want to go after versus this is something that's not gonna do so well?
Honestly, when I first got started, like the only thing that you could do is you had the Amazon seller app, and you had whatever the sales rank was currently, and whether or not it was profitable. That's all it was. You know, you'd look at it and you'd say, okay, it's under 100,000 right now. It's going to cost me 5. I'm going to sell it for 25. We're going to buy 1. And then we would just go wide and then kind of figure out, okay, well, these are what people like. This is what people don't like. And then we'd start looking for more of the stuff that people do like. That was all you could do until Keepa there was camel a little bit that you could look into. It wasn't great data, and then Keepa came on the scene, and it was an epiphany. It was like, oh man, I get it. I understand it. I can see this historical data. I can make much better decisions. It was the best thing to happen to Amazon sellers ever, other than Amazon being created.
Yeah. Yep. So one thing that I kind of noticed as you were kind of giving the intro is everything's changing all the time. And one thing that I heard in particular that I think maybe our audience will appreciate would be kind of hitting on there's been some recent fee changes. You mentioned the long-term storage fee, which kind of obliterated your book business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you had to pivot. And so I'm curious as to what your perspective is on the changing landscape, how we should be approaching that, and just, what your mindset should be for someone that's seeing all of this stuff on the timeline, and like placement fees, all these fees.
It's cliche, but change really is the only constant. Change is what took me from what I thought was going to be my lifelong career into making money on the internet. I thought I was going to be an insurance agent from the time I was the youngest licensed insurance agent in the state of Ohio ever when I got my license. Someone ended up beating me. But at the time I was 18 years old in one day. And he was, because my birthday was like on a Sunday, but the changes in the insurance industry and the company that we were kind of a franchise for is what forced me out of that business. I wasn't going to be able to take over a family business. They did not want you creating blogs or YouTube content when that was something that you absolutely it was the forefront of technology at the time, and I knew that the internet was going to be it's the thing. The same thing goes for Amazon. There's always going to be changes in one way or another, whether it's Amazon fees coming in and destroying your book business, whether it's a brand getting gated that you can't sell anymore, which has happened multiple times this year. New fee placement, new fee structures, all kinds of things. Amazon's going to do what's best for themselves and what's best for the customer, and we just have to figure out a way around it. Whether that is sourcing differently, sourcing with better margins, finding better deals. That's on us. It's kind of the definition of being an entrepreneur. We come across problems, We solve them, and then we profit from solving those problems. Doesn't matter whether you're in a service business, doesn't matter whether you're in an insurance agency, doesn't matter if you're an Amazon seller. That's why we get paid, is because we figure out problems and then we solve it. So I think we've got to have that mindset that everything's figure outable, and as long as we're willing to roll the punches, we could probably get through just about everything.
Very cool. Well, Chris, you've seen so many different iterations of fee changes and different folks that come on the scene. If for new sellers that are listening in, right, as they're starting to get on their journey, what is some of the different advice that you would give them as someone that's been seasoned into the community to kind of set that expectation of what they should be doing if they're in this for the long haul as an entrepreneur?
Well, the very first thing I think you should do is, one, realize that the landscape is always going to be changing. And two, don't take it so daggone personal. It's not Andy Jassy or Jeff Bezos saying, how can we stick it to the Amazon seller today? It's them trying to figure out how they can keep Temu or Temu or whatever. I don't know. That I don't like them. I've never shopped them. Whatever they call themselves. How can we keep them at bay? How can we make sure that TikTok doesn't eat our lunch? And that's where they're trying to, they're trying to skate toward the puck. And we have to be like, okay, well, let's think about it from their perspective. Let's figure out why these changes might be happening, and then how can our role adapt in that change that's coming along. For years, this has been a years-long process. Amazon used to be just fine with us sending them all of our garbage and them basically storing it forever. And then they said, no, we're only going to store it for a year. And then they said, well, you know what? We'll store it for a year, but at 6 months, we're going to start charging you a bunch of money for the space that you take up. And now they've got low-level inventory fees, which I think I have said quite often, it's not as big of a deal for arbitrage sellers as arbitrage sellers think. I think that I've been vindicated in that so far. Amazon wants stuff to move through their warehouses. It's not a storage facility. It's a pass-through facility. So if we can figure that out, great. And with all the other changes that Amazon made, like the inbound placement fees, those probably hurt the worst. Probably the worst change that I've seen in a long time for sellers. But I understand what Amazon's trying to do. They're not necessarily trying to hurt us. They just want inventory placed closer to the customer to get it there faster. And they're not willing to pay the bill of FC transfers anymore. Amazon has two customers. They've got the customer that buys the product. They've also got the shareholder. And so that one is probably to make the fulfillment side a little bit more in the black for the shareholder, make them a little bit more happy. As long as we're willing to figure out how our role changes, I don't think there's really ever going to be a time, at least in the next 5 or 10 years, where we can't make some money in the arbitrage game on Amazon.
One thing that I kind of heard was, everything's changing all the time. And maybe for the new seller, because those are the folks that are probably going to be the most reactive to this because they're just starting, they're gathering that capital. Maybe it means we're going to FBM a little bit longer to beef out that skill. And then we pivot into FBA once we've kind of earned those stripes. So, I think that we just need to be a little bit more, maybe more patient, and maybe we don't get right into FBA right off the rip. Maybe that's how we react. Yep.
Yeah, if you've got the ability to FBM, it's kind of a cheat code, especially today when there is a much more significant share of a regional buy box, when Amazon is more willing to give FBM sellers buy box share because of the speed at which they can get things to customers locally. Plus, it costs them a whole heck of a lot less money to let you fulfill it than it does sending into their warehouse. So it's kind of a win on all sides, and you get that cash back a whole lot faster.
Absolutely. So one thing that I think we may have glossed over, maybe a reason that a lot of sellers come into this space is leaving the 9 to 5. Can you talk a little bit about what went into that decision? Kind of, what was it like emotionally? Was there a perfect moment? That sort of thing.
There was definitely not a perfect moment.
Yep. Yep.
My situation may have been a little bit unique because I worked in a family business. Um, my grandfather was the proprietor of the insurance agency that I worked at. He was really only still working because I was there, and I wanted to take over eventually. I'd given up an opportunity at the age of 21 to take over another insurance agency to stay on the family business. And the insurance company that we were kind of a franchise of, they decided that families could no longer take over family businesses. They wanted to do a roll-up strategy where larger agents would kind of acquire smaller, to mid-size agents. And so these $50 million agents were taking, the $3 to $5 million family offices, and bringing them into their house. When that writing was solidified on the wall, I was like, okay, I got to figure something else out. And that is what really kind of made the transition to Amazon much faster. I also had a little bit of a unique situation that in my contract I had 6 months of renewals, but I wasn't making a ton of money, and so I was like, okay, well, we're just going to pick a date. We're going to do this, with my wife, saying it was okay. Like, we're going to do this. I've got a 6 month runway. Worst case scenario, I could probably go become a manager at a grocery store, and probably work my way up the chain. I was like, Walmart managers make like 75 grand a year. I could get that job like that, and so she was like, okay. And so January 1st, was my first day, quote unquote, unemployed or self-employed. And for the next 6 months, I knew that I had to make it or break it. It was one of the most stressful periods of my life. It sounds like all sunshine and rainbows, but I spent an amount of time hiding under the covers, sleeping half the day away, scared, maybe a little depressed, very anxious. I was, at the time, it was something that I was ashamed of. Now it's something that I realize it's probably a lot more common, that people don't actually talk about that. But it was, in the long run, I am so glad I did it. I wish I had done it earlier. But in that moment, it was the scariest thing I had ever done in my life.
So let's unpack that for a little bit here. If you were going to give your younger self any advice on going through that journey, I know within having our audience that these are the types of things that everybody's thinking about. What's that cliff look like? When's the right time to do it? If you were going through that experience again, knowing what you know now, what would be some of the things that you would be thinking about for a business owner that's also about ready to either consider taking that leap or is getting ready to do it?
So the things that I wish I had a 6 month runway. Okay. But that was all that money that came in. Part of it had to fund my business and part of it had to pay the bills. I wish that I had been much, much better at putting some money away, to have a little bit more runway, have a little bit more cushion. So make sure that if you're going to quit a job, a lot of people say, oh, well, you need to have 6 months, 6 months, all your bills paid, etc. I would really suggest more than that. 9 months, a year is going to make you feel a whole heck of a lot better, if you're willing to hustle for the next 12 months. I would go back and I would tell myself to do it earlier. It was a good time when I did it, but I wish that I had done it 4 or 5 years earlier. There would have been less at risk. I had my first house when I quit my job. I had a kid. He had already been born by the time I quit my job. So there was a lot of risk. I was burning the boats. I would prefer people not to be in that kind of situation if they don't have to be. It'll let you know a lot about yourself and what you're made of if you have to be in that situation. But it's not the ideal situation to be in, and it doesn't make you a better business owner having that much stress and worry on your shoulders while also trying to run a business, make sure that there's food on the table and a roof that stays over your head, and all that stuff.
What did the business look like when you cut the tie with the job? Like, what sort of systems did you have in place? Kind of what level of competence? Okay, what level of competence do you think you had, or did you just cut it?
Yeah, no. My competence level was not good. I had no systems in place. It was just me, and everything, literally everything was in my brain. There was, I didn't even like I should have written down, the names of store managers because I would go and I would take coffee and donuts to managers, and I would, shake hands and, say, hey, could we work out a discount, or hey, could I shop your clearance before you put it out on the store shelves? And that worked a ton. But I'd have to, every time I walked in there, I'd be like, oh man, is this John or Jerry?
Oh no.
And that was, unfortunately, most of them were wearing name tags, so I was okay. But I really should have had a lot more systems in place, and but that kind of stuff wasn't talked about back when I started either. It was kind of like, source, sell it for 3 times what you buy it for, and you're good to go. Nobody was really talking about like, here's how to run a lean system. Here's how to create an SOP. Here's, nobody talked about that.
Yeah. And would you say at this stage in the game, are those things that you could have actually prepared for, or is it something that you just kind of had to go through the trial and the fire to say, hey, this is now how I learn. I go from being an Amazon seller to being a business, to being an actual business owner. What's your perspective on that?
I think you can learn some of that stuff conceptually, sure. But I don't know that you can actually take it in properly until you kind of have your feet in the fire. I probably should have paid attention in my business classes. I didn't. After I think the 3rd day of college, I quiet quitted before it was called that. I just stopped going to class, and instead I took my class time and I just read business books for 6 months, and then I dropped out of school. Would I have learned some things that I could have used in my business, like, what an SOP was, how to read a profit and loss statement, that kind of stuff? Yeah. But I still don't know whether it would make sense without going through. Heck, I still have problems reading a P&L. Those things confuse the heck out of me. I don't know that you can actually really learn it until you kind of get into it.
So one thing that you mentioned in there is how much information is available now.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe can we talk a little bit about, where the competition was, where it currently is, and maybe touch on like relatively like how much information it is, and maybe that played in a little bit to, your ability to quit and be successful with maybe not as many systems. Can we touch a little bit on that?
There was a lot less competition back when I started. You could walk into a store, you could throw a rock, and you'd probably hit a profitable product. It is not like that anymore. The marketplace has matured. As any money-making opportunity, that's just the way it is. Blue oceans become red over time. That's not a slam against, this particular marketplace or the amount of information that's available. It's just the way it is, no matter what. And it's been the way it has been for, 250 years. If there's a way to make money, people will be drawn to it. I think that the lack of education did make it a lot harder. The platform was easier, sourcing was easier, but there just wasn't a lot of help back then. And so for the people who were willing to kind of embrace that suck and figure out things on their own, you could probably get through it. But if I wanted to start over again today, the amount of information that's out there, almost makes this too easy. If we're being honest,
Yeah.
it's not a difficult game that we play.
No.
You buy low, you sell high. Arbitrage is a simple formula. What's difficult is all the little nuances we have to know about the platform. How come I can't get ungated in this? Well, have you sent it in 32 times? That's the way it works. Amazon does one thing, even though their terms say another.
Yep.
That's the difficult part. People like black and white, and we don't work in an area of black and white. We work in an area of gray.
100%. Well, and then did you submit 32 times and then post about it on Twitter? Like that's the requirement, right? It's a new.
That is a requirement. Exactly.
And I think, Chris, you're the staple, the one that we go to for any of the new information. So can you talk a little bit, especially on X, how you take these complicated topics and explain them in ways that are just so easy to follow? Because I have to suspect that as you're going through some of these and you're trying to think through, how do I structure the type of information? Like, what's your process to be able to make it not only informative, but also relatable for the community?
Well, I'm writing to an audience of one, and that audience is an idiot. That audience happens to be me. Okay, so I pretty much, whenever I read something, I just need to break it down in my own brain, and I figure, well, if it works for me, it's probably going to work for another person. Now, but in reality, I actually learned this by being a dad. Okay. So I've got a 17-year-old that we have adopted in the past year, and I've got a 10-year-old. But with my 10-year-old, since he's been around longer, we have this agreement. He's allowed to ask me any question under the sun. There's nothing off limits, and I will give him an answer, even if that answer is, "You're not old enough to know that yet." But when there's something that he does ask and he wants it to be explained to him, I know that however I understand it, I need to explain it in a way that he will understand it. And so that's sort of how I structure anything that I bring in. Will my 10-year-old understand it if I write this way? And that's how writers have to write. If you're going to write information or put information out there, you have to write to a fourth or fifth grade level of reading. And so I work very, very hard on that to put out complex topics into something that's fairly relatable, fairly understandable for everybody. I'm not saying that everyone has a fifth grade reading comprehensive level. That's not the case, but that's the easiest level to take in information, and that's just based on that's based on studies. That's based on stuff I've read. And so that's kind of my whole mindset is I write to figure it out for myself and to be able to explain it to my 10-year-old if he were to come and ask me, which he won't. He doesn't care anything about selling on Amazon. But
so as one of the kind of the OGs of Amazon Twitter, at least from my perspective, what do you think about the person that's trying to get involved in that community, how they should approach it? Because for a lot of people, it takes a little bit of trial and error. But kind of what would your perspective be there?
I think first and foremost, you need to be authentic. When I first got, I've been on Twitter for years and years, kind of as just as somebody who reads Twitter. Years and years ago, I probably would have gotten into some political debates as well, which was stupid and a waste of time. But then when I decided that I really wanted to kind of get in the middle of Twitter, I think that I tried to come at it from this angle of, I'm going to be this scholarly, writer on Twitter. That was stupid. That's not how I talk. That's not how I chat with my friends. It's not how I text my buddies. And so I think after 2 or 3 months, I kind of figured that out. And I was like, I just need to be me. My wife calls me a goofball. And so I figured, let's just go that route. So, number one, just be yourself. Like, everybody's weird in their own way. You're going to find the other weirdos that kind of click with you, if you're willing to do that. Um, and then the other thing is just put it out, like, just put something out there. You know, whatever you're thinking about, whatever you are having trouble with, something that you've just learned. Uh, you know, I think too many people put a bunch of tweets in their drafts and then never post them. And they're like, well, how come I'm not growing, or how come I'm not meeting people? Well, you're not taking a chance. You got to remember, maybe 5% of your audience is going to see what you post on Twitter. And if you've got 5 followers, that's not very many, you know? So you just really got to put in the reps, but most importantly, just be yourself.
Yeah, people overcomplicate it. They get bogged down. They're, maybe trying too hard. Just it's not that deep. Just consistently do it. You'll get good feedback. And then over time, the beautiful thing is that information will find you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I put out a tweet about my thumbnails, got feedback. Oh, you could tweak this and they'd be better. Like,
that was great feedback. I read
it was
that.
great. Yeah, I was like, that's really cool. Now, one tweet that I thought was incredible that you put out this week was about the top 5 Amazon sellers and studying them.
Oh.
So I thought that was a really cool tweet, kind of a new angle at looking at things. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Just some highlights for the folks that maybe didn't see that tweet. We'll pin it in the the description. But so the average rank of like the top 5 sellers is what, 250,000 roughly?
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. So what do you think that says for the folks that maybe are just starting selling, and like kind of how they should approach, sales rank in general, like over the long run, maybe not at the beginning, but
this is something I talk, like, when I do the OA challenge, this is something I talk about a ton, because what a lot of people want, especially newer sellers, is they want this, you kind of want to be put into a box, where everything is so nuanced, everything is so, well, it's probably like this, but it might be this other way when it comes to selling on Amazon. They just want something to be clear cut and simple. So, a lot of people will say, oh, well, you need to source things that have a 30% ROI, that are under 50,000 in sales rank, and it needs to fit X and Y. That's great for the first week or so, but there's so much opportunity outside of that little box that you get put in, that you're missing out on so much profit. I think that, and what I always talk about is, I think you need to have some guidelines, but you need to have the ability to break one of your rules if there's a reason for it. So my example is always, I always have someone ask me, well, do you source 30% ROI? Well, yeah, that's great. I love 30% ROI products. However, if I could buy a product for $1 and make $1 profit on it, and maybe, that's not true, because that'd be 100% ROI. If I could buy a product for $10 and I make $1 in profit on it, but I can sell it 500 times a month and the price never changes, I would buy that all day long. I'd buy 500 units, I'd send it in, I'd let it sell, and I would just keep replenishing that until I couldn't do it any longer. That's only a 10% return on my investment, but now multiply that by the amount of turns I'm going to be able to do over the course of a year, and it's a much bigger number than that on the amount of money invested in that product. And then the other thing is if I want to source something, let's say a beauty product that sells for $75 and I'm sourcing it for $30. If it's ranked 250 or 300,000 in the category, most people are going to overlook it, but can I make 40, 50 bucks a month on that product and sell it for the next 6 months? All right. I'm not going to leave $50 laying on the ground if I walk by it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick up those products as well. So I think we need to, maybe instead of defining our sales rank and our minimum ROI, we need to start focusing on sourcing OA like the wholesalers source. Can I make X amount of dollars per month on this product, and does it fit my margins? Am I going to be able to take home a 10% margin at the end of the month? Okay, well, if it fits that criteria, then I'm going to do it. If that means it's one sale a month and I make $50, or it's 500 sales a month and I make $250, I'm in, as long as I've got the capital to be able to outlay on those products. The other thing that makes it a little bit more difficult to really figure out is how much capital do you have? If I'm starting with $100, I need to source completely differently than if I'm starting with $100,000. You know, with $100, I need to worry about the velocity of my money, how quickly I'm going to be able to get it back, how fast I'm going to be able to reinvest it, and at the same time, because I have so little to bet, which is what we're doing, we're betting with better data. Okay.
Yeah.
I need to be able to take a bet that is going to pay off larger than I would need to take if I'm going to spread out my $100,000 across every single spot on the roulette table.
Very cool. Chris, you're the definition of a systems thinker. To be able to think things through, like what is the data point that allows me to make a decision? Where's another spot that I can run a new experiment or be able to create a new edge or a new moat? And I'm curious because you came up through the insurance ranks and you came up through that path, and you're pretty adamant in the software space. So where did your interest in software start, and how do you apply that to your business?
My interest in software started from a very selfish place. As I was getting into OA and starting to think about, should I make content about all these things that I'm doing? There was someone who I wanted to learn from, someone I wanted to be friends with. He happens to be my best friend now. It's Nate McAllister. Okay, we're now BFFs. Okay. But at the time, he ran one of the largest FBA groups on Facebook, and he was difficult to get a hold of, and we weren't like friends. Even we actually grew up like within a mile from each other growing up, but I couldn't get a hold of him. But one day in a Facebook group, he's like, man, I would really love if there was a Chrome extension or a piece of software that did this. And I was like, all right, challenge accepted. So I went out on Fiverr and I hired someone and I paid him $35 to create my very first Chrome extension called Easy Blur. You could highlight words or images inside of Google Chrome. You could click Easy Blur and it would blur out those things so that you could screen record without having to edit on the back end. And so I sent him a message and I said, hey man, I saw your post the other day. I know that you wanted a software like this. I said, so I went out and made it. Here it is. You can side load it into your Google Chrome. And here's how it works. Here's a little video on exactly how it works. I hope you enjoy it, man. And that was it. And that got a response. That got us to, kind of open a conversation. And it turned into an extremely fruitful and long friendship since then. That is what made me fascinated, because I took an idea, I turned it into a quote unquote tangible product that solved a problem. Now the problem was I wanted to slide into someone's DMs and I wanted them to answer me. Okay. But then going forward, I always looked for what are some other problems? And the next one was, I hate having Capital One Shopping and Rakuten and this and that and all these other extensions popping up while I'm sourcing. How can we make that go away? Well, that's why we created Rev ROI. We wanted to have just one spot where I could click through to the cashback sites, the discount gift card sites, and I didn't have to have 4 or 5 different extensions installed, and it was able to lower the amount of space I was using, RAM or memory or whatever you want to call it, but still make sure that I was getting the best cashback and not missing any of them because I didn't have it installed. And then it went on to IP Alert and the other things. Now, I don't know anything about software. I can't code anything. I barely know what an API is. The only thing I know how to do is come up with an idea and then find someone who can build it for me. And that's what we've done for every SalesGazer, IP Alert, Rev ROI. I've got 3 or 4 extensions that I've never released to the public that have been built that way. And I've got half a dozen ideas of things I want to build. And if I look at code, I mean, I have no idea what I'm even looking at. So,
yeah, you hit on something there. It says generally as software engineers, we're always looking to build the product, and you have this if you build it, they will come type mentality. And that's completely false most of the time, right? So I love your perspective of that. You took it from the other angle and you said, hey, I'm trying to find a way to either slide into someone's DM, solve a different type of problem, or be able to approach to something where it's like, hey, where can I make my life easier or more effective as I'm going through sourcing? So I always find that very fascinating as you go through and do reviews of each of the different softwares that come into the Amazon community. What are some of those things that you're looking at when you're making an evaluation to add a new tool or capability into your portfolio that you say, hey, this is just something that's, it's not really unique, versus, hey, this is something that's got some legs here?
that's a good question. I think the only, again, I have to go back to when I do it, I'm kind of being selfish. Does it solve a problem that I think I have? And if it does, then it will probably solve the problem of other people as well. So if we're talking about a sourcing software, okay, well, if I'm looking at it, if I'm evaluating it, is it solving something that, I'm having trouble with now? Tactical Arbitrage did that way back in the day when they first came out. I was sourcing everything by hand, and now I can set up some scans, and I can go to bed, and I can just have products to look at when I wake up. Great. I was saving a bunch of time, and I can just bolt it on to the process of sourcing now. A profit calculator like SellerAmp, it saves me from having to deal with that god-awful, FBA calculator that Amazon offers, and it gives me something attractive right on the page I can look into. And so when I evaluate new products, I really just try to kind of go through that lens. Does it solve a problem? Does it do it well? Does it save time? And if it does all of those things at what I think is a fair price, then I'm all about adding it to my own arsenal.
Well, Chris, as we wrap up, is there anything that you kind of wanted to mention or talk about prior to maybe helping new sellers? Anything that's been running through your head lately?
I think the biggest thing lately is it seems like a lot of new sellers that I've been talking to or interacting with on social media lately, there seems to be this lack of grit. And I hope that people can get a little bit more gritty. This is still one of the easiest businesses to start, whether it's a side hustle or a full-time thing. I mean, can you imagine going and starting like a service business where you got to go buy $5,000 worth of lawnmowers and a trailer and insurance, and you got to hire a couple of guys to go mow some lawns for $35 a yard? You can start this business for less than $250 a month. You can learn almost everything for free on Twitter, and in Discord groups. And you can bet $100 or $250 worth of inventory. And yet I still see people saying, oh, well, this doesn't work, or I tried it for a week. Give it 6 months, give it a year, put some real effort into it. Turn off the daggone TV, spend 2 hours a day on it, and just have a little bit more determination. I know I'm going to sound like such an old man. I know we live in a TikTok society where everything takes 30 seconds. I struggle with this with my own kids, but it takes a whole heck of a lot longer than that. Read some books about entrepreneurs of the past and how long it took them. Most overnight successes, most unicorn businesses that we hear about coming out of like YC Combinator or all these other places, their market cap is $1 billion, but you don't see the 10 years it took them to get there. And an Amazon business is no different. You know, we've interviewed people who on our podcast who did 13 million. We've got a guy coming up who does 25 million a year. It wasn't like that from day one. It's not going to be like that from day one for anybody. So keep at it, put your head down, do the work, and you'll get there eventually. This can be an infinite game if you want to play it like that. And in infinite games, the only way to lose is to quit. Well, with Amazon, I guess, or get suspended. But don't get suspended, don't quit, and you should be able to build something, and build it for what you want, not what everyone else kind of projects. If you only need an extra $1,000 a month and you enjoy your day job, fine. That's what Amazon can be for you. If you want to build a $15 million a year business and you want it to be your everything, great. You can do that too, but pick your heart and then stick to it.
100%. I think that's a great note to kind of leave on. I think, couldn't have summed it up better. But, as we wrap up, just want to plug Chris's newsletter. We'll throw that into the description as well. 5 Things Friday.
Thank you.
Giving out the current events of what's going on, what's ever rumbling around Chris's head. But Chris, thanks for coming on. And I just really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. I appreciate you.